Hello, guys. Greetings once again, and welcome to another biology class. And for today, we want to continue from where we stopped in our previous class. In our previous class, we talked about ecology, and there are a few things we talked about in ecology. If you can remember vividly, we defined ecology. We said ecology is the study of the interrelationship that exists between organisms and the external environment. And we also talked about the definition of this thing called environment, the physical and chemical factors surrounding the organism or within the surroundings of the organism is what we call the environment. Then we also talked about the levels of organization, where you mentioned the species level, the population level, the community level, and we have the biome, we have the ecosystem, the biosphere. These are the levels of organization. We also went further to talk about the uh, ecological niche, the specific functional roles organisms perform in the environment. Some are producers, some are consumers, and some are decomposers. And all these have importance or what they contribute to the progress of such an ecosystem. We also talked about ecosystem as a self-supporting unit that is made up of the biotic and abiotic factors. We mentioned some of these biotic factors, man inclusive, plants, animals, then abiotic factors, temperature, light, and so on and so forth. Then we also went further to talk about the feeding relationship that exists between organisms or among organisms within an ecosystem. We mentioned food chain as a linear food relationship. I also mentioned food web as an interconnected food chains, a food chain that forms a network involving more organisms. Then we also talked about the Raymond Lindemann 10% rule, which says that it's only 10% of energy that is transferred along the trophic levels. And I think that was okay. We also talked about pyramids, the graphical representation of the relationship that exists between organisms in an ecosystem. So that's for part one of ecology. Ecology is so vast, and that is why we had to divide it into two parts. I hope you can see me. Okay. And that was why we had to divide it into two different parts. So we want to look at the part two of this course, the part two, and the part two talks about, we want to look at different headings. The first one is interaction between organisms. We want to first of all look at interaction between organisms in an ecosystem. The interaction that exists between organisms in an ecosystem. Just a minute. Okay, so when we come to interaction that exists between organisms and ecosystem, we have different types of interaction. The first one is parasitism. And in the case of parasitism, a parasite lives in or on the body of the host, deriving nourishment at the expense of the host. So this is also a part of the association you can see in a typical ecosystem. And we'll have myriads of examples that denote this. You can refer back to our classes in parasology. You can look at some of the things we've done in parasology with respect to parasites, so you can have a grounded view of what we are talking about. So that is one of the association. In this case now, like I said, a parasite lives in or on the body of another organism, and that organism is now called the host, and of course the parasite lives at the expense of the host. Then we have another one which we call the commensalism. In the case of commensalism, we have a commensal, we have the host. So the commensal, feeds from the host or benefits from the host, and the host In this case, neither gains nor loses. That is another kind of association that you can see, observe within an ecosystem. Then, of course, we'll have the next one, which is called uh, predation. In the case of predation, the predator wholly eats the prey. So predation and parasitism are not the same. There are differences between predation and parasitism. In the case of predation, organism, the predator wholly eats up the prey, and but in the case of parasitism, the parasite gradually kills the host. For instance, if you have uh, Entamoeba histolytica, which is a parasite, or let me say Plasmodium, which is a parasite, and man. So man is the host, Plasmodium is a parasite. So if Plasmodium is affecting man, it does that gradually. As a matter of fact, that's why I said if you can refer back to all the things we did in parasitology, then you can have a better understanding of what we're talking about. Because a good parasite or a wise parasite or an ideal parasite, that's the ideal term. An ideal parasite will not want to kill the host because the parasite knows that the death of the host automatically signals its own death. So uh, I was talking about the fact that in parasitism, the parasite gradually kills the host, but in predation, the predator forcefully kills the prey. Then another difference is that you discover that the predator is usually bigger than the prey, but the parasite is usually smaller than the host. So these are some of the little differences between predation and parasitism. Then another kind of association is the one we call symbiosis. Symbiosis. And in the case of symbiosis, you discover that two organisms two organisms that are in that association, sorry, two organisms that are part of the association benefit from the association. I'm always careful not to use the word equally because it's difficult to actually uh, know if the contribution is equal. I am contributing, you are contributing. That forms mutualism. That forms mutualism, and is difficult for you to say that I contributed 70%, whereas you contributed 30%, or that I contributed 60%, whereas you contributed 40%. So that is why it's always uh, I'm always careful to use the word equally. But what we know is that in mutualism, the two organisms contribute to make up that kind of association. Of course, we can say lichen as a typical example. Okay, I didn't mention an example of predation. In the case of predation, you can see snake and lizard. Snake is taking up lizard, is swallowing or eating it up completely. So then for commensalism, we have a Trichomonas tenax and the Entamoeba gingivalis in the mouth of man. That is one of the examples of commensalism. These protozoa commensals benefit from man. They feed on the droplets of food particles in our mouth, but they don't cause us disease, so we neither gain nor lose. Then, of course, we have the case of shark and remora fish. Shark and remora fish, when shark is done feeding, it leaves some droplets of food particles, and the remora fish feeds on those droplets of food particles that are left over in the mouth of a shark. Then shark, of course, because shark is so gigantic and does not even know that a remora fish is on his body. So the weight of remora fish on his body is negligible or infinitesimal, and shark no longer needs the droplets of food particles coming out from his mouth. So the remora fish is actually benefiting, but shark neither gains nor loses. Assuming it's pinching shark, assuming the weight is so big that it's weighing down shark, assuming it's causing a disease, then of course that will no longer be commensalism. So in commensalism, the commensal benefits, then the host neither gains nor loses. Remember, for medical students, the reason I made mention of shark and remoral fish in this case of commensalism is because we are not treating parasitology. This is not parasitology, this is pure biology. And in biology, you include both parasites and non-parasites. So if we are talking about parasitology, then of course I would have thought about the case of mm, maybe a bacterium and a fly. A bacterium and a fly. Okay, no, bacterium and fly talks about forests. So if it were in parasitology, then we would have talked about the first example I gave, the entamoeba gingivalis and Trichomonas tenax for in man, in the mass of man. These are commensals. They are parasitic. They are parasitic. Sorry, when I said they are microscopic, not parasitic. They are microscopic, not parasitic. Remember, when you say parasitic, that means that they cause disease. So these are protozoa organisms. They are normally called the commensals. They are normally called commensals, not parasites. So that is it about that. Then example of mutualism is lichen. In the case of lichen, you discover that the case of lichen, discover that we have algae and fungi that form this association. We have algae, a minute. We have algae, we have algae and fungi that form this association. So you have the algae, contributing. You also have fungi contributing. So the algae, of course, help to produce food. Then through recycling of nutrients, fungi helps to make nutrients available for the algae to be able to grow. So they both are contributing to the success of this association, and that is why it is called mutualism. Then we have the competition. In the case of competition, that's another kind of association. The case of competition, you discover that in competition, the organisms struggle for limited resources. They struggle for limited resources. And it is important to note that competition is more fierce between uh, organisms of the same species. And that leads us to what we call the intra-specific and inter-specific competition. We have intra-specific competition when competition exists between organisms of the same species. Then we have inter-specific competition when competition exists between organisms of different species. So because these organisms are of different species, of course they may have different resources that they feed on or that they require to grow within the environment. And because the resources are not the same, then the competition will not be fierce. But when you have organisms of the same species, because they require the same kind of resources to thrive in that environment, then that competition becomes fierce. And in this case now, the strongest or the winner or one becomes stronger than the other, and the one that is stronger than the other completely kills or eliminates the other because probably it has some set of characteristics that makes it more adapted in such environment than its partner or uh, than the other organism within that environment. And in such a case, then that stronger organism kills the other. That is what we call competition exclusive principle. And in this case, the winner takes it all. The winner is the one that is stronger, that kills or eliminates the other or causes the extinction of the other because it has some set of characteristics that makes it more adapted or that makes it to adapt more to such environments. So it now kills or eliminates the other. It is known as a competition exclusive principle. It was G.F. Gauss, a scientist called G.F. Gauss, G.F. Gauss, so many years ago, that performed this experiment using two strains of Paramecium caudatum, and of course, they are of the same species, and that was where or how he brought about this principle called the competition exclusive principle. All right, so that is competition exclusion, not exclusive. Competition exclusion principle. Competition exclusion principle. Competition exclusion principle. Competition exclusion principle. So that is all about what we have to say or discuss in the first interaction among organisms. Then let's go into okay. There's a little mistake I made. The 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 species he used are Paramecium aurelia. Sorry, I said two species uh, of Caudatum, but no, it is Aurelia Caudatum. Hmm. He used a mixed culture of Paramecium aurelia and the Paramecium caudatum. These organisms are related. They are very related, and they actually depend on. They're related and depend on the same kind of resources. And that is why competition, according to him, was fierce when he uh, had a mixture of these two organisms within a culture. When a cultured, when they had a mixed culture, when they had a mixed culture of these two organisms, Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum. Caudatum. Okay, so we'll go into environmental issues. Global environmental issues. Global environmental issues. Global environmental issues. Now, we have lots of global environmental issues. We have lots of them, global environmental issues. And as much as we can, we'll be looking at them one after the other. We'll have the one they call the environmental pollution problem. We'll have uh, the greenhouse, the greenhouse uh, gas problems, the greenhouse effects and global warming. They will have problem of acid rain. We'll have erosion problem. These are we have problem of desertification and so on and so forth. So these are some of the environmental problems that we have. Problem of drought, problem of desertification. These are some of the environmental problems. We're going to look at the first one, which is the environmental pollution. Environmental pollution. When you talk about pollution, you're talking about the release of unwanted substances at a level that becomes injurious to man or at a level that harms man. That is what pollution is all about. And pollution has been in existence or has existed since the first man appeared on earth. Because, of course, once a man is in an environment, you cannot but talk about pollution because man is also an agent of pollution or an agent or a factor when it comes to the equation of pollution. You cannot completely eliminate man. So, pollution has been a factor that has been in existence for a very long time now. And it's important we look at this pollution because some of the happenings on Earth is because of the increase in pollution. And we'll look at the different types of pollution. The first one is air pollution. Air pollution. So if we have the release of unwanted substances into the air, of course, it causes the contamination of the air, and that contamination of the air is what we call the air pollution. We'll have different pollutants. different pollutants that can pollute the air. We have dust and smoke. Dust and smoke. Dust, of course, is a suspension of sand and probably other solid particles in the air, and that of suspension of carbon in the air is what we can use to describe the smoke. So both dust, dust and smoke can cause the pollution of the air. And of course, once a man takes in this dust and smoke, it can irritate the respiratory tract and even the lungs. Then, of course, we have the sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide is also another kind of gas that can pollute the air. And of course, you know that once sulfur dioxide mixes with water, it results to sulfuric acid, which is called the acid rain. Mm? The sulfuric acid, which is called the acid rain. And of course, sulfur dioxide is poisonous to plants and reduces crop yield. It reduces the crop yield. Mm? Then we also have lead compounds. We also have lead compounds. Lead compounds can also cause pollution of the air. For people who work in oil companies, they are usually exposed to lead compounds. That can actually cause pollution of the air. Then, of course, we have oxides of nitrogen, we have carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, which is produced as a result of incomplete combustion, can also cause pollution. And this is so dangerous that it has killed so many people. Of course, you know the case of exhaust fume, fumes from the fumes from generators, people who keep it close to their room, and probably in the course of sleeping in the night, you hear that a whole family was wiped out. That is because of the inhalation of the carbon monoxide. And of course, you know that the protein in the body that helps in the transportation of oxygen within the body is the hemoglobin. So this carbon monoxide goes to combine with this hemoglobin to form a carboxyhemoglobin, and that carboxyhemoglobin loses the ability to transport oxygen within the cells, and such individual suffocates and dies. Then, of course, carbon monoxide, even though it's not harmful, carbon monoxide is not harmful, but we're going to talk about carbon monoxide. I mean, carbon dioxide itself, is one of the greenhouse gases. We're also going to see how that carbon dioxide can also be a problem, even though the gas itself is not poisonous. It's not poisonous. So, control of air pollution. How do we control air pollution? One of the ways to control air pollution is to site factories outside residential areas. Some of these pollutants that are airborne are produced from factories. So, if factories should be sited, it should be done far away from residential areas. Then, companies can also build tall chimneys that kind of cause the dispersion of these pollutants once they are taken up the sky. When it's very tall, it's avoid those pollutants being localized within a given location, especially if there are residential houses in such environment. So the building of top chimneys, that releases the gases, or that release the gases into the atmosphere. Of course, it disperses it and makes it to have little effects on man. So then factories can also use filters. They can also use filters. These filters can help to filter some of these poisonous pollutants from the air before they are finally released. Then water pollution. Of course, the same thing that happens in the case of air happens in the case of water. The way air can be polluted, water can also be polluted. And we have various factors or various things that pollute the water body. Like for instance, we have the untreated human excreta. It pollutes the water. And okay, we'll still look at solution, pollutes the water. Then we'll have industrial waste. We'll have industrial waste. We'll have agricultural waste. Then we'll have oil, crude oil. Yes, crude oil can also pollute water body. Crude oil, in the case of crude oil, of course, once it's found on the surface of water, then it reduces the level or the amount of oxygen that is dissolved within that water environment. And once there's limited amount of oxygen, of course, the aquatic animals within that environment begin to suffer for it, and it can result to their suffocation, and ultimately they may die. So, crude oil or oil in general is also another water pollutant that should be avoided at all costs. Then, of course, recycling. Recycling of waste, sorry, what's it called? Treating of waste before being released into aquatic environments can help to reduce pollution. Then recycling of some of these waste, any of the waste that could be recycled can also be recycled or should be recycled before being released into the aquatic environment. Some of the bottles and cans that are being deposited in water. Some of them are even oil cans, and the rest of them, these cans can be recycled. And farmers should also reduce the way they use fertilizer. The use of fertilizer has become a necessary evil, but farmers can reduce the amount of fertilizers or insecticide that they use in their farm, because of course they are washed from the farmlands into aquatic environment. Then in terms of crude oil, of course, crude oil, they kind of contaminate water during loading and unloading of the oil, and during repair of some of the vessels, or leakages of some of these vessels. So experts should be employed, in taking care of these vessels, and in loading and unloading of the oil to reduce contamination in our waterways. All right, so we'll go into the next environmental issue, which is greenhouse effect and global warming. The greenhouse effect and global warming. We'll have what is called the greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases such as water. Water will have chlorofluorocarbon. Chlorofluorocarbon. They'll have methane. We'll have methane. We'll have nitrous oxide, and what again? Ozone. Yes, ozone. Let me write it in full. Carbon dioxide. So These are referred to as the greenhouse gases. A minute. These are referred to the greenhouse gases. And these greenhouse gases are so important that without them, uh, the earth will be a lifeless place. When I say lifeless, that means that no single life will be able to exist here. Let me explain what happens. Of course, you know that these gases form what is called a blanket within the atmosphere. They form the what we call the ozone layer, and this ozone layer actually allows the rays from the sun to come into the earth, but then they also help to trap some of the heat that are being reflected back to the atmosphere. Once the rays from the sun reaches the earth, we have some of the long infrared rays that are reflected back. And once they are reflected back, or as they are reflected back, these gases help to trap them within the atmosphere. Because if they don't do, and trapping them means that they help to a kind of uh, trap the rays of the sun, and as they trap the rays of the sun, it kind of warms the earth. It kind of warms the earth or increases heat within the earth. mm. Because if it does not happen, the uh, the amount of cold within the earth will be so much that no life will be able to exist. But something may be good, and once it becomes excessive, then it also tends to be a problem. So these gases now we are talking about, even though they perform a very good function in retaining heat, they perform a very good function in trapping some of the sun's rays to retain heat. Once it is too much, it becomes a problem. We are talking about an increase in carbon dioxide within the environment. Once this carbon dioxide, and not just carbon dioxide, other greenhouse gases are increased, then they trap so much heat more than expected or more than necessary. And when they trap so much heat, what will now happen is that the heat within the earth will be so much. And this results to what we now call the global warming. The global warming. Because the earth will be so heated, will be so warmed, and it will now result to global warming. And of course, once you have global warming, it will result to so many environmental issues. Sorry, rise in sea level, then flood, then of course the breaking of the polar ice cap. And once the polar ice cap is destroyed or is broken as a result of so much heat, then of course the earth will be so cold that no life will exist there. So can you see what these greenhouse gases do? They have their own advantages, and too much of these gases within the atmosphere also has disadvantages. And that is why you hear people talking about planting of trees, because afforestation or planting of trees will help to trap some of this carbon dioxide that are in the atmosphere. Because of course you know that in photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus water, then glucose and elimination of oxygen. So the more trees we plant, the more we make our environment safe, because the trees during the course of photosynthesis will be trapping the carbon dioxide, reducing the amount of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere. So that is what global warming is all about. And these greenhouse gases, just like I said, they have their advantages, but once they become too much in the atmosphere, then of course it becomes problem. This chlorofluorocarbon, okay, I didn't write it. Chloro, chlorofluorocarbon is also one of the greenhouse gases, and that is why this chlorofluorocarbon was used initially in making of fridge. But now I think it has been banned in some countries because of the negative effect of the gas. All right. So we're now going to control of water pollution. Okay, I think I've said that before. Control of water pollution, treating of physics before being discharged into the environment. Then industrial waste material should be recycled. I've also mentioned that. I also mentioned that farmers should also reduce the amount of fertilizers they use in their farms. So I think that is all about this uh, this second subheading, which is greenhouse effects and global warming. Greenhouse effects and global warming. Want to look at the third one, which is succession. Succession. When we talk about succession, we're talking about uh, the process through which a community goes through a number of temporal developmental stages before it arrives at the climax stage, or before the climax community is produced. The uh, gradual, developmental, temporal, you can see the keywords that are used is gradual, developmental, and its temporal stages that a community goes through before a climax a stage is produced, or before it arrives at the climax stage. That is what succession is all about. So in the case of succession, you see that the pioneer organism will give rise to another set of organism, and that set of organism will give rise to another set of more complex organism until the most complex organism is produced. And once that most complex organism is produced, then we will now say that it has arrived its climax stage. And it can take hundreds to thousands of years depending on the type of succession. And this will lead us into two different types of succession that we'll have. We'll have the primary succession, we'll have the secondary succession. Now, in the case of primary succession, you're going to discover that is a type of succession that occurs in an environment that does not have a previous vegetative sites. That does not have previous vegetative site. That means that this is an environment where no life has ever lived before. Where no life have ever existed before, sorry. Where no life has ever existed before. So is the kind of succession that occurs on bare land, in newly formed land. Eh? So that is but that's how it is defined. That's how this defined. It is defined. It said primary succession are initiated. The word initiated. That means it commences or starts on a fresh, non-biologically modified site. They're initiated on a fresh, non-biologically modified site. So in in an environment or in a site or on a site where no life has ever existed before. And this is what makes the difference between primary succession and secondary succession. Because in the case of succession, secondary succession, it occurs where life has existed before, and probably because of disturbance. And this, when I say disturbance, I could be, I mean, maybe wildfire or something else that destroyed the plants within such environment. Then they begin to grow up again. So life would have existed there, but as a result of disturbances, which probably would have been caused by man, then those life were destroyed and they begin to grow up again. So that is about a secondary succession. But before we go into this secondary succession in details, let's exhaust the whole of primary succession. So in the case of primary succession, it usually begins with a small organism, or what we call the pioneer organism, such as the lichen. mm. The lichen are usually the first group of organisms that emerge in the case of primary succession. Then after lichen, you see something like mosses, mosses. Then you see something like shrubs. Before we now come to perennial crops. So it begins with the lichens. You now see mosses. You now see shrubs. Before you now see perennial plants, perennial plants, or herbs, or perennial plants, or perennial herbs. So that is how this succession starts, or how it occurs. It begins from much lower organisms like lichen, algae, and fungi. Then it advances into the mosses, into the shrubs, then into the perennial plants. And this perennial plant, in this case, can now be called the climax stage. It has achieved this climax stage. And like I said, this achievement, or this climax stage in question, is not something that happens within weeks or years, or let me say 10 years, 50 years. It takes a long time. It occurs within thousands of years before these things can occur. And that is talking about the primary succession, the one that happens on a site that life has not existed before. Then the second one, okay, causes of primary succession, or have erosion or glaciation. Then we'll of course have the landslide. Of course, when there's a landslide, sorry, or earthquake, then of course new land is formed. New land, completely new, fresh land is formed. And once that new fresh land is formed, then of course it goes through this process before a climax stage is formed, or a climax a community is formed. You can also notice that on a bedrock, primary succession can also occur on a bedrock. Of course, you know that on a bedrock, of course, there is no plant. But after a while, discover that some of these small plants, like lichen, begins to grow little by little on the surface of the rock. And as the roots is penetrating, as the roots as the roots are penetrating the rock, then it's resulting to a crack within the rock. In a long in the long run, that crack will begin to bet little soil, which other more sophisticated plants can grow on. And that is also another example of primary succession, or how primary succession can occur on rocks. So the climax community is a stable final community, self-perpetuating and in equilibrium with the physical environment. All right. So we'll now look at the secondary succession. And like I said, secondary successions are the result of disturbances and take place on previously modified sites. They take place on previously modified sites. Secondary succession begin wherever the existing vegetation has been destroyed without denuding the area or of the soil covering it with new plant and material. Secondary succession commonly develop after forest fires, lumbering operations, severe overgrazing, and abandoned agricultural land. So if you have abandoned agricultural land, or if you have too much lumbering operations or activity within a land, then you have overgrazing, then it could destroy the vegetation within that site at that moment. And it takes a long time for these vegetations to regrow back again. And that is what secondary succession is all about. Secondary succession usually result from the activities of man, and therefore the most common type of succession. Then let me point out one difference, which I said before, but let me read it out now. He said they have fewer stages. Secondary succession have fewer stages because it happens faster compared to primary succession. So the number of stages in secondary succession are small compared to that of the primary succession. So you say it has fewer stages than primary succession, and the climax is reached more quickly in hundreds of years than in primary succession, that the climax is reached in thousands of years. Again, while primary succession starts with low organism, the secondary succession starts with uh, a fairly complex organism. Mm? So if primary succession will start with a lichen, the secondary succession may start with the mosses. Mm? So it starts with a fairly complex organism. Then I've mentioned the causes of primary succession. We have uh, excessive flooding, we have hurricanes and tornado, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So that is what succession is all about. A minute. Okay, so we are done with succession. The next thing we want to talk about is the ecological groups. A minute. The ecological groups. The ecological groups. So we want to look at different ecological plant groups that we have. Different ecological plant groups. We'll have the first one, which is called the hydrophytes. Hydrophytes. We'll have mesophytes. We'll have xerophytes. We'll have halophytes. We'll have epiphytes. Epiphytes. So these are the different ecological plant groups that we have. We'll have the first one. The first one is the hydrophyte. Hydrophyte. Phyte means plant. Hydro means water. So when we say hydrophyte, so we mean the water plant. Those plants that live within the aquatic environment, mm, they are called the hydrophytes. Sorry. And you're going to see, if you study hydrophytes, you're going to see some of our distinct characteristics you see in hydrophyte. For instance, there's absence of cuticle. Mm? The epidermis is devoid of cuticle. Of course, you know that the outermost part of a plant is called the epidermis, and usually has a cuticle in land plants that cover the epidermis. And the essence of the covering is to reduce loss of water. But hydrophytes are in an environment that have so much water, so they have no need of reducing the loss of water from their body, and that is why there's absence of cuticle in the epidermis. Then they don't have root cap and root hair. The land plants that need to absorb water from the soil, and of course you know that absorption of water from the soil starts from the root hair, are the ones that require the root hair. But aquatic plants are already in an environment, they have so much water. So they don't need any special root hair to be able to absorb their water. Then In the soil, discover that roots always have a, a structure, a composite structure that covers the tip to avoid maybe wound or friction with the soil particles. But in aquatic environment, there's no need for that. So there's absence of root cap. So you can see some of the small, small, little characteristics of hydrophytes. Then another one is okay. I think I've mentioned that already. They have soft stem. Yes, because they're already in aquatic environment, it's called that their stems are very, very soft, very, very soft. Then they also have air cavities, which give them buoyancy. Mm? These air cavities on the other hand give buoyancy to the plant floating, and okay, they show what is called buoyancy. That is the ability to float in water or on water. They have the xerophytes. The xerophytes. These xerophytes are the ones that thrive in an environment where there's uh, where there's little water. Hmm? Where there's little water, or in dry places, like in the desert. You see cactus plants here. So we also have some characteristics or plants that stay in this environment. Of course, you can remember what I said about cortical. That means that cortical should be one of the characteristics, the epidermis of this xerophyte should have cortical. Since they stay in an environment where there is no water or where there is no much water, then of course they need cortical to be able to reduce the amount of water loss. And of course, because it's in the soil, they also need protection of the root cap, of the root apex, and that is the function of the root cap. Of course, they need root hair because absorption occurs through the root hair. So these are some of the characteristics. And they to retain water absorbed by the roots, the leaves and stem of some plants become thick and fleshy. And they also have tap roots. Tap roots are those kind of roots that goes right inside the soil in search of water. They have this kind of roots to be able to have enough water for itself. Then there's strong development of sclerenchyma in most of the xerophytes. Unlike the case of hydrophytes, sclerenchyma is one of the supporting tissues that support a plant. That's a plant that is strong and stout and erect, planted on land. So water helps to support the water plants. So, but in the case of land plants, xerophytes, they require sclerenchyma, this supporting tissue. Okay, then mesophyte. Just a minute. In the case of mesophytes, mesophytes are those that, of course, thrive in an environment that has average temperature and water content. These plants grow under average conditions of temperature and moisture. That's what I just said now. They grow under average temperature, average condition of temperature and moisture. That means that the environment is not too hot, it's not too cold, then it's not too what it's not too water filled, then it's not too dry. So in an average environment, and most of the plants that we plant, most of our plants are usually mesophytes, because it's not they don't stay in water. They are not called aquatic, and they are not planted in the desert. So our environment has this condition of average condition of temperature and moisture. So most of the plants fall under the mesophyte. They will have some other characteristics of mesophyte. Their root is well developed with taproot, as in dicot and fibrous. So the same way xerophyte have taproot, this one also have taproot. They also have taproot. Then they also have root hairs. They also have root hairs that help to absorb water, and of course, they also have cuticle within the epidermis that help to reduce the amount of water. Trees have broad leaves to facilitate. Okay, 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 okay. So I think that's it about that. Then we have the halophyte. Halophyte. These ones are the ones that dwell in saline environments, environments that has salt content. Well, some of the characteristics that they produce large number of silt roots. Some special roots called nematophores are also produced. They produce nematophores. Nematophores are breeding roots, and I think we have talked about these breeding roots in the case of when we talked about the types of roots in angiosperm. Now, of course, epiphytes are those that grow perch on the trunk of trees of others. They grow perching on the trunk of trees of others. That means that they grow with the help of support from other neighboring objects or plants. And epiphytes don't actually feed on the plants that support them because they are not parasitic, they are not parasites. What they just need that association for is just for the purpose of support. They can produce their own food. They can also absorb their own, water, nutrients from the soil. But when it comes to for support, then of course they extend their uh, their parts in order to anchor on other plants that will give them support. So that's it about epiphytes. Are there characteristics of epiphytes? Yes. They can quickly attach themselves to support by formation of what we call clasping roots soon after germination of the seed. Number two, many of them have xeromorphic characters so that they can withstand drought situations. Yet, yes, this is another characteristic. Most of the epiphytes, they have xeromorphic characters. That means that they sustain the abilities to withstand drought or lack of water. Most of them have efficient mechanisms for seed dispersal, and the others produce a large quantity of extreme minute seeds on orchids. Have thick cuticle and stomata, sunken stomata. They also have thick cuticle. A root has three main functions: to absorb water, to filtrate. All right. I hope we still have time. I don't want this video to be too long. Okay, so we are about rounding off. We just have two more things to talk about. Then that will be all. So the next thing I want to talk about now is what we call conservation. 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 Sorry. When we talk about conservation, we are talking about reducing the process of reducing the exploitation of natural resources to ensure its long-term use for the purpose of man. The process of reducing the exploitation of natural resources to ensure its long-term use for the benefit of man. So we have several resources that should be conserved. And the reason are conserving these resources is to make sure that we ensure its long-term use, and ensuring its long-term use is for the benefit of man. Scientists or researchers have predicted that in the next 40 to 50 years, Nigeria may not have oil, crude oil, or our crude oil reserve, may be exhausted. And if nothing is done, hmm, if nothing is done with respect to this, that means that the people that will live in the next 40, 50 years may have nothing to fall back on. And that is the reason, or that is why the concept of conservation is very important. And crude oil is not the only thing we conserve. We have so many things that should be conserved to ensure its long-term use for the benefit of man. As we go further, we're going to see some of these resources that should be conserved. The first one is wildlife. And of course, wildlife, when we talk about wildlife, we're talking about the population of non-domesticated animals. So this wildlife ought to be conserved. You know, uh, there are so many animals on earth, and some of them have gone into extinction. Reason being that man, through poaching, have driven some of these animals into extinction. But we need to conserve our wild animals because our wild animals are also important. They help to maintain the ecological balance. As a matter of fact, every animal created by God is important, including snake. They have a role they play, just like we talked about ecological niche. Every group within the ecological niche, has a role it plays in order to help in the perpetuation of life within that particular ecosystem. So all animals are very important, both domesticated and non-domesticated animal. We have often maligned and abused fellow creatures that render our environment tenable. The abundance and variety of wildlife are declining at a rate, and some are the edge of extinction. This is because of large-scale hunting, mechanization of agriculture, clearing, deforestation, and so on and so forth, road construction, wildfire, harsh, harsh climatic condition. You can see some of the factors that have resulted to decline in our wildlife, harsh environmental condition, road construction, urbanization, wildfire. Once some of these things happen, they destroy our wild animals. So how do we conserve wild animals? One of them is through the establishment of game reserve. Mm? This is an area where animals are allowed to live naturally and are also fed, allowed to live naturally. They are fed within the environment. Then they also at liberty to reproduce in such environment. So you can get an environment where you have wild animals, then you fence it off. Then those animals are living as though they're in their natural environments, even though it has been fenced off. That is what we call the game reserve. You have the one in Bauchi, Yankari Game Reserve in Bauchi. Then there should be legislation too. When I say legislation, I mean laws should be in place to reduce hunting activities. If these animals continue to be hunted on daily basis, of course, it can result to extinction of the animals. The artificial stocking, young native animals are bred and introduced into the bush. You can pick up animals, young animals, train them, kind of grow them within home environment and still go back and introduce them into the bush for them to continue their reproductive activities in such environment, which is of course their natural environment. That is what we call artificial stocking. Then domestication of some species in fenced areas. We can also have domestication of some species, but these species you're domesticating should not be dangerous ones. You don't go and domesticate lion, except probably it's in a fenced area. If it's in a fenced area, then of course you can domesticate any animal that you want. Then we also have forest conservation method. How do you, of course, that forest is also important. Forest is a source of so many things. wood for furniture activities and even medicine, even medicine and fiber, that is our clothing, provide shelter. There's many importance of forests to mankind. So it is also important we conserve our forests. So one of the ways we can conserve forests is through the establishment of forest reserve, also establish a forest reserve. Then of course selective logging. If you are to cut trees, cut only mature ones. And as you cut, make sure you replant again to replace the one that has been cut down. So anytime there is deforestation, it should also be followed by afforestation. Then by reforestation, sorry, yes, either okay, reforestation, that is replanting of trees or afforestation. Then legislation, laws should also be made, so that anybody who calls a tree, indiscriminately should be arrested and should be allowed to face the music. Then efficient forest management, such as plant tree cutting to avoid destroying young seedlings. Yes, I've said that there should be efficient forest management. Then the last subtopic is ecological instruments and their uses. We have the quadrat. The quadrat is used to determine the density of a population. mm, That is the population size per unit area. Then we have thermometer. Thermometer is used for temperature. We have rain gauge for measuring the amount of rainfall. Then we have an anemometer measuring. Okay, I think that's the last now. Let me write down some of these instruments and their uses. Measuring density, determining density, determining density. That's number one. So we have a we have the what they call the putter. Some people call it the leaf putter, which you use to collect insects. The pH indicator to measure the degree of acidity or basicity. They have the soil auger to measure the soil profile. Then we have the one we use to measure atmospheric temperature. That is the barometer. then distance, collection of bed, then measuring of water density, use hydrometer. Then if you want to collect insect, use sweep net. Use sweep net. I think that is then the hand net used to scoop specimens from rivers, line transit used for plant sampling, the Secchi disc, of course, this one is popular. The one used to check or determine turbidity of water is the one they call the Secchi disc. The Secchi disc used to determine the turbidity of water. Then lastly, erosion. Of course, erosion is the washing away or the eroding of soil by either water or wind. That is erosion. That means that a wind can cause erosion and water can cause erosion. We'll have different types of erosion. We'll have erosion. The first type of erosion is called the sheet erosion. Sheet erosion. Sheet erosion. And that is when either the water or the wind, uh, erodes the surface of the soil or the land. Then after this sheet erosion, as the erosion continues, then it kind of creates channel within that soil. That channel it creates results to another kind of erosion called the real erosion. And as the erosion continues, these channels continue to expand and widen, and it now results to what is now called the gully erosion. The gully That results to what is now called the gully erosion. The gully erosion. So these are the three main types of erosion. Then, if you want to control erosion, you can use what they call the cover crops, especially legumes. You can use cover crops. The plant of cover crops. These plants of cover crops, it helps to reduce erosion because as the rain falls, it falls on the leaves and it reduces the pressure through which it goes through the soil to erode the soil. So erosion is more fierce in on a bare land that does not have plants, that don't have plants within that such land, or where plants are not plant, where there are no plants, where there are no plants. So the presence of the cover crops, the leaves of those cover crops help to reduce the pressure at which the water flows on the soil. Then the roots and the cover crops too helps to join or to pack the soil particles together and to bring the soil particles together. And once they are packed together, then it reduces the rate at which water can erode them. So that's the importance of cover crops. Then we also have what they call the terracing. We also have what we call the mulching. The terracing and the mulching. Then yes, then we have storm drains. So these are some of the ways you can control erosion. Then the last one says some common diseases of man caused by a pathogen. Of course, there are so many diseases that are caused by a pathogen. So many of them caused by a pathogen. We have the one we call the syphilis, Treponema pallidum, then leprosy, Mycobacterium leprae, tuberculosis, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, malaria, Plasmodium falciparum, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So that is how far we can go in talking about this part 2 of ecology. Thank you for being part of our studies. Share this video to as many that you know will need them. Then we are going to continue in our next class. See you in my next class.